I don't necessarily care about being the best in the world. I want to be the best possible version of myself.
The Olympic gold medal race, the women's 8 at Tokyo 2020.
Stay in my lane, keep my head in, ultimately trust myself and believe in myself and my teammates.
Canada, who are going to win their first gold in the women's 8 since 1992.
Go for it, just hold nothing back. I just had so much belief.
Today in Chatter That Matters, we're joined by an Olympic gold medalist whose journey is as inspiring as her stroke is powerful. Avalon Wasteneys has not only conquered the waters, but the waves of change in her life. She started off as a competitive cross-country skier and then moved into demanding waters of rowing. Her story is about transformation, tenacity, and the enduring power of dreams. A journalist called her a self-proclaimed rebellious teenager, but what everybody will learn from this show is what goes inside the mind of someone who dreams and goes after being the best in the world, who overcomes their own mental well-being, ADHD, anxiety, health issues like mono, chronic bronchitis, and what she's learned about herself are lessons that are so important for everybody out there. Finish the race. Understand your why. Even if you're not motivated, even if it's one of the toughest days, just do something. There's so much that's part of this incredible lady as she sets her sights on Paris 2024.
This is Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
Avalon Wasteneys, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get into this.
So what's in the water in Campbell River, British Columbia, that it seems like there's so many extraordinary athletes that do so many extraordinary things?
Well, yeah, I will say that Campbell River definitely has created a lot of really awesome athletes over the years. But for me personally, I was actually born in Toronto. And when I was 5, my family moved up to Vancouver Island into the middle of nowhere. Strathcona Park Lodge is where I was raised. It's about 45 kilometers outside of Campbell River. And Strathcona Park Lodge is an outdoor education resort that is run by my aunt and my uncle. And so my family lived just off property, and it was a very remote community. But we had like a little schoolhouse for about 10 different kids of all different ages. And I just grew up in that very isolated environment until grade 9, when I started going to middle school and high school in Campbell River.
How hard was that to make the transition? I know I'm going to be disparaging, but it's almost like a commune. You're all together as a small group. You know, everybody's sort of living and knowing each other's business. And then you have to go off to a high school. Was that tough on you?
That was really tough. I think I was just very fortunate that one of my cousins, who I was very close with, she is the same age as me. And so I was able to go to school with her, and she was just like my buddy and my best friend throughout that dramatic change in my life. Inside
your family, there's a lot of athletic pedigree. Your mother, Heather Clark, competed in the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul. Mm-hmm. Your aunt, Christine Clark, in the 1984 Summer Olympics in 8-boat. So was that just part of your family, the sense of being outdoors, getting off the beaten path?
Totally. Yeah. I come from a family of high performance athletes. My dad was a rower, actually. He never went to the Olympic level, but he was certainly really good. On my dad's side, my uncle Stephen was a really competitive canoe kayak athlete. My uncle Jeffrey was a cross-country skier, and my Aunt Claire was a cross-country skier. So there was just like a lot of high-performing athletes all throughout my family. And so it was just something that was natural for me to gravitate towards.
I was reading an article on you, and this journalist, proclaimed you a rebellious teenager. How dare you choose competitive cross-country skiing as a sport over rowing? But I understand, though, that cross-country skiing was a big part of your family's activities in the winter, and maybe the first time to be declared, your dad actually likes it more than rowing.
Yes. I think people imagine maybe that there was a lot of pressure to row, but rowing was just actually never really spoken about in my family. I just never remember my mom putting any pressure on it. It was just kind of offhandedly talked about. But skiing was the big family sport because it was something we could all do together. And my dad just loves being in the outdoors. He's a very active man to this day. And so he really pushed all of us to get into cross-country skiing. And I started it when I was 5 and then quickly became very ingrained in that community and was a competitive cross-country skier until I graduated high school.
You cite, I mean, obviously there's an incredible DNA within your family that roars, but you also put a lot of credit towards your coach at the time, Dave Battison, and talking about what he did to make you believe. What did he say to you that maybe we should all be reminded of in terms of encouraging people to go after their dreams?
Yeah, so Dave Battison, he was one of those first people I think that really ever made me like truly, truly believe in myself. He was a really tough guy, full of, jokes and, always teasing us. But he could always like flip a switch and suddenly was just so caring, inspiring, and just motivational. And when I joined the junior race team, he was the head coach, and listening to him talk about racing, it just gave me chills throughout my body and made me want to find that success that he was just like so reverently talking about. He was a huge inspiration to so many local skiers in that community. And was just always willing to like help athletes and help other coaches. And he, I'd say, really built the program up and put this small club on the map. So yeah, he was that guy, I think, that made me for the first time realize that like, I might just be like a random girl from Campbell River, but that didn't mean I couldn't do really incredible things. And he was, one of those people that just made me go like, wow, maybe I could do this.
A girl from nowhere gets named to the national talent squad. And at age 16, did you have aspirations that you could become one of the best, if not the best in the world in competitive cross-country skiing?
Yeah, I mean, I always had this dream of competing at the Olympics or just like being the best at something. But at the same time, looking back, I don't think I necessarily believed it was anything more than a dream. I never really was sure how I would put that dream and put into actuality. And Dave was kind of that person who was helping me get the stepping stones I needed to achieve those dreams.
One thing that you're only starting to really talk about, and I think it's important to share, and maybe it was part of your upbringing and the changing circumstances, suddenly going to a high school that, instead of a small schoolhouse with 10 people in one room, is anxiety, ADHD. And how did you cope with that going on, the pressures of competing at at a national level, and everything that's going on inside a body that's kind of leaving childhood and becoming a young adult?
Yeah, I had undiagnosed ADHD during my childhood and teenage years. And with it came very severe anxiety that honestly was very debilitating at times. I obviously still have ADHD. I still have anxiety. But I think sports kind of provided this opportunity for me to essentially undergo exposure therapy. It provided opportunities to face my very extreme anxieties without any serious repercussions beyond maybe like a bruised ego. And it really helped me learn to make my anxiety more fun. It made me go into these situations where I was just like felt completely ill with anxiety. But then I would push into that and I would race or I would train and I would feel myself get adrenaline from that essentially and perform because of that anxiety and because of that, desire to do really well. I think actually I realized maybe in my final year of skiing, I had just been really overcome with anxiety. I was really struggling to handle it during racing. And I actually started to kind of try to numb that anxiety and those nerves as a coping mechanism. And that just actually led me to not caring as much, which is not what you want. And then because of that, I think I stopped performing as well. I always try to use sport as an opportunity to remind myself that my anxiety and my nerves, that just means I really care. And so I'm really grateful for the fact that sport has pushed me to face those anxieties over the years.
How did you cope with the passing of Dave Battison? I mean, he meant so much to you, the first person outside your family that really believed you could be the best of the best. He certainly would have been very understanding, or at least very aware of what you were going through in terms of your mental well-being. What impact did suddenly losing him have on you?
Losing Dave in 2014 when I was in grade 11 was honestly really devastating for myself and for the entire Strathcona Nordic ski community. Like I said, he was just this beacon of belief, and it was really, really important to everyone. And I think that was definitely part of the reason why I ended up retiring from skiing, because I had this person who I thought was going to, help me go all the way. And then suddenly I felt very alone.
Do you ever feel he's with you now in the sense of some of the lessons he taught or how he might have helped you cope in different situations? I mean, do you carry that forward no matter what sport you're in, or not even in sports, but just in life in general?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think everyone who has been coached by him will remember the little Dave-isms that he would say to try to inspire us. Some of them were just really hilarious and not applicable. But one of the things that really stuck with me was that he would always tell us that we had to, no matter what, always finish the race and to never, ever, ever give up. And those two things really helped me to just instill this self-belief over time and focus on doing the best I could, versus focusing necessarily on how the results.
I've done a lot of shows in mental well-being. I have to believe, though, that Daveism, if no matter what, finished the race, would have also contributed to the anxieties leading into a race.
I think sometimes when you're someone who has anxiety, you can get really focused on the result. Like, how do I perform? What if I look like a fool? What if I don't hit the podium I want? But the one thing you can always control, unless something really bad happens, like you break all your equipment, no matter how slow you go, you can always control the fact that you can finish the race.
It's such a wonderful piece of advice for anybody in any task that you're doing, to just finish the race, because there's so much pride that comes with the sense that you started off in a journey and you finished it. So you teased the fact that this is where you retired from competitive skiing. You go off to the University of Victoria, and you choose oars over poles. Did your mom and aunt have any influence in that, or was that just decided that would be the next sport that you were going to focus on? Yeah,
a little bit of both. I think my parents saw that I'd begun to lose my passion in grade 12. And I think they were concerned that I was going to end up just going through the motions. And so my mom suggested rowing to me. And I was very, very against it, actually. I was just really offended that she suggested it, because in my mind, I was like, you don't believe that I can make it in skiing. But I think in actuality, she just saw that, I was actually probably done. And I think the other unfortunate side of it was that sport in general is extremely expensive. And cross-country skiing is very, very expensive. And my parents sacrificed a lot in order for me and my siblings to competitively cross-country ski. And suddenly there I was in grade 11 and grade 12 and prepared to go off to university or go off to a national training center, and realizing that I didn't have any of the funds to support myself in that sport. And so my parents were kind of like, we can't support you in this anymore financially. So if you want to go to the Olympics, you're going to have to figure out a different way. But it really wasn't until my dad, I think, was the one that was like, are you prepared to spend years banging your head against a wall in pursuit of this Olympic dream through cross-country skiing? That made me realize that, you know what? Yeah, maybe I should switch things up and try something new that can spark that passion again.
What was it like when you first, you took up rowing in university, knowing that there's legacy with your family, and not just legacy, but Olympians within your family and such? Did you ever get in there and say, this is my identity, or I'm kind of, now the baton's been passed on to me?
Honestly, never felt any of that pressure, remarkably. I think my parents have always pressured me to be in sport, but they've never necessarily pressured me to perform based on external goals. They would honestly just be happy and proud if I was happy and having fun and being active. And so I never felt that kind of pressure. I just was excited for an opportunity to be completely new at a sport and just start from the ground up and have all this opportunity for growth. And I think at the same time, my I just grew up surrounded by rowers. They're a lot of my family friends. And so it just felt kind of natural to be entering into that community.
The growth that you experience in this sport is, to me, extraordinary. And I think you know that RBC also sponsors my podcast. So I've gotten to really understand the RBC Training Ground. But 1 year after your first strokes in a rowing shell, if I have the timing right, you go to the 2017 RBC Training Ground, which is really identifying future talent that could potentially own the podium. And from what I understand, and certainly have seen in the videos, you win that competition.
Yeah, I won the BC regional event.
That must have been incredible. I mean, because when I look at the videos of Training Ground, it's not like you're suddenly slotted in a lane. It seems like people are jumping, they're running, they're cardio. I mean, give me a sense of what happens within Training Ground.
Yeah, so when you go to a Training Ground event, they have a lot of different disciplines that they want you to compete in. So it could be like a 100-meter sprint. It could be a 6-second max watt bike. It could be an endurance bike where you're like going up in stages. So it's just looking at all these different markers for physical prowess. And it's really just an opportunity to either shine maybe in strength or endurance, or be all around good at a bunch of different disciplines. And then there are a lot of different NSOs, so national sport organizations, who are present at these training grounds and identifying people that they think could be good at their sport.
And there's been some incredible stories of people coming in saying, I didn't even think that was a potential sport for me. And next thing you know, they're sort of being fast-tracked in it. How did it feel? Like, I watched the smile on your face. I mean, there's an auditorium full of athletes and your name is called. It must have been, did you have a sense you were going to win that day? Or were you just so happy to be among a bunch of elite athletes that it didn't matter?
When I went to that event, I actually initially had no desire to go. Once again, it was my mom who pushed me to do it. And so I was just kind of there for the experience and for the opportunity to maybe get some additional funding, because I was working 2 jobs, I was going to school, and I was trying to competitively row. So I went to it with really no expectations, just a little bit of hope that maybe I could gain some more support. And then I remember sitting among the crowd of athletes, and they're about to announce who had won. And I suddenly see the camera pan towards my face. And I just suddenly had this moment where I went, oh no, this can't be real. And then they called my name, and I was just so shocked. And I remember like stumbling down the bleacher stairs, and I was just so embarrassed because I never really liked being in the spotlight. So I was embarrassed and really, really excited and proud, and had all those emotions kind of going through me.
Myself, our great honor to call up Avalon Wasteneys from Campbell River, British Columbia.
It just feels great. Like, I know it's a long road, but it's just that much closer, and I feel like I have a lot of people behind me now, which is just so amazing.
It's such a beautiful clip, and the smile on your face, and I'm a father of 2 daughters, and I could just imagine how many times your parents have looked at as well, because that's just, your child is now moving into a different league, and she's going to be just fine. And I thought that was wonderful. And then several months after the RBC Training Ground, you start training with a national team. So, I mean, if I'm getting this right, I mean, this isn't that long after you first stepped in and started working with the University of Victoria, and you make your international debut in the women's 8+ at a Senior World Cup.
So basically, once I got identified at the Training Ground event, suddenly it felt like everything just started speeding up. Suddenly there were these benchmarks that I was supposed to be hitting for rowing, and there were people checking in on my progress. And suddenly I was getting these opportunities to train with the Canadian national team. And that was just completely shocking. Like, I didn't know how to handle that. I was so excited, and I felt probably a lot of imposter syndrome, but I was super excited. So in 2017, in October, shortly after doing the Training Ground event, I got to go with the national team to the Head of the Charles, which is this really massive regatta in the States, in Boston, and I got to compete with the team. And so I trained with them for 2 weeks, and I competed with the team. And then I was like, okay, great, see you guys later. And I went back to the University of Victoria. And then several months later, the coach reached out to me and goes, why haven't you been at training? And I was just so shocked, because I thought that was just like a once in a lifetime chance. and I probably wouldn't get that opportunity again. But in reality, they were like, you are supposed to be here training with us. So then I pretty much transitioned over to the national team. And then that summer, I was just hoping to try out for the U23 national team. But myself and one other U23 athlete, we both got named to the national team as well for the senior national team. And so that summer, my very first World Cup regatta was in Lucerne, Switzerland with the Canadian Women's 8. And we got silver at World Cup 3. And then after that, about a few weeks later, I went over to Poland and I competed again in the women's 8, but the U23 category, and we won gold. So it was just like a very, very quick turnaround for me. And I think up until that moment, I've had people asking me, like, do you want to go to the Olympics? Do you think you're going to go to like the Tokyo Olympics? And I was just like, probably not. Like, I'm not going to accelerate through this sport that fast. But that moment made me realize, actually, maybe I could.
And how's the anxiety and like, how are you coping with all of this? Because, I mean, this is a fast track. Are you once again channeling this instead of at a disadvantage to an advantage, or is this something you have to deal with every day?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had a lot of anxiety about it. Especially our coach at the time. He was a very difficult coach, ended up being, fired for abusive behavior. And so he definitely preyed on that kind of anxiety that I had. And I was just like a very eager young athlete. I would do whatever I was told, took advantage of every single opportunity I could. And I just really went into training with the idea that I had nothing to lose. I only had every opportunity to gain. And I just tried to keep some of that excitement about being able to train with these women who had so much experience and so much to offer me.
So the 2020 Olympics is now on your horizon, but once again, there's a health issue. This time you come very sick with mononucleosis. To me, anybody I've ever known that's had mono is bedridden. How did you manage to deal with that and still keep your sights set on, I want to be part of that Olympic team? Around
that time, that was when COVID had really rocked the world, and the Tokyo Olympics had been postponed. And so it was a really just interesting, crazy time. But I was training on my own in isolation, and I started to become very, very tired, very fatigued. I couldn't get through my training sessions. I just was feeling really wretched, and then ended up having some crazy symptoms, flu symptoms. I ended up being admitted to the hospital for severe dehydration, and was diagnosed with a very severe case of mononucleosis. And I remember just feeling so horrible about that because at this point, the Olympics had been postponed, but I was still like, we are still in the Olympic year if they go ahead in 2021. And so I was very terrified. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle it. The doctors were telling me, I was probably going to be outside of training for the next 4 months. And at that point, I was like completely bedridden. I would get up to get a glass of water and I would have to take a nap like halfway through in the living room because I just like couldn't go all the way from my bedroom to the kitchen. It was really terrifying to think of the fact that I was going to have to get myself back into shape in a pretty short time period in order to be ready for the Olympics.
You held them for a long time there.
The big boats, the 8s. This is the Olympic gold medal race, the women's 8 at Tokyo 2020.
So let's go to the gold medal performance in Tokyo. Avalon, I understand that every seat is important, but the seat you're sitting is the stroke seat. Tell us a little bit about what is the responsibility of the person that's really there to set the tone for the race.
So I would describe the stroke seat as basically like the crown of a court. I'm going to put this in a very fictional fantasy way of describing it. They're like the crown. And so they're leading this army to battle, essentially. They're the person that everyone looks to at the head of the charge. They're setting the rhythm, they're setting the pace, but behind them, they have an army
what a start by Canada.
of individuals who are fueling that rhythm. Every seat is equally important, and every seat adds something really special to the crew and very unique. But stroke seat is the one that's kind of leading that charge.
And why you? I mean, you studied psychology at university, did a minor in anthropology. Was it something you learned there? Was it something you learned with Dave when you were cross-country skiing? Is how you dealt with anxiety? I mean, what do you feel you had the attributes beyond just the athletic prowess for them to sort of put that oar in your hands?
Well, I think I was just very consistent. And I think I still am. That's one of my attributes that I am quite good at in rowing. I can be very consistent with my rhythm. So I think I'm relatively easy to follow in that regard. And then I think I'm just also very tenacious. Once I'm in a race environment, I want to win. I'll do whatever it takes to get there. And so you want someone who will drive the crew to do whatever they can to win. You want that kind of person in stroke seat.
Do you think any of your ADHD plays to your advantage in that when you're sort of getting hyper-focused on not just the outcome, but the rhythm?
Yeah, totally. I love talking about ADHD in sport in this way. I think there are a lot of athletes that have ADHD because being physically active through sport is a great way for us to just hyper-focus in and take advantage of that ability to hyper-focus and just be totally ingrained in the rhythm or whatever sport we're doing. And so I totally think that ADHD, it can be a superpower when you're in a sport like rowing.
Tokyo Olympics have been delayed. You're going into it. I would say that you were thought of as the underdog. So take us to everything that goes mentally into setting yourself up to prove everybody else wrong. So
in the year leading up to the Olympics, obviously there hadn't been any opportunity to do any international racing due to COVID. So we were just training on our own. We were using the Canadian men's four to train against and to push ourselves with. But we had no competitors that we could directly match our speed with and see how we were doing internationally. So we really had to just create this sense of belief within the crew. We made this commitment to one another that we were going to redefine excellence. So we were going to perform no matter what. And performance didn't necessarily have to be a gold medal, but we had to walk away feeling like we had contributed to the sport of rowing and we had made it better in some way. So we went into this just kind of this attitude that we were going to do the absolute best we could. We wanted to win gold. We wanted to prove to the world that we were the best there was. But we also were just trying to, really be focused on ourselves and focused on what we could do as a team. Going into the regatta, we placed second in the first two races that we did. And so going into the final, yes, we were, medal contenders, but I don't think anyone thought we were necessarily going to win gold. But that's where it was just complete trust in one another, complete unuttered grit, and just desire to prove to the world that we were the best ones there.
It's Canada who are going to win their first gold in the women's 8 since 1992, ahead of the Kiwis.
She's out of her seat, the Canadian Cox, Kirsten Kitzer. Hug Avalon Wasteneys, a 23-year-old.
And did you know the moment the race started that this was your day? Or a lot of times people go, they talk about being in the zone, or Michael Jordan on his documentary just talks about walking on the court, knowing that even if he wasn't trash talked, he would create a competitor to be his best at. I mean, take us through, do you feel that way, or is that more just Hollywood and how we like to glamorize sports?
No, when it was the day of the final, I woke up and I was just like, we're going to do this. I truly believed that we could win the race. I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking about the fact that it would be winning the Olympics, but I absolutely was so determined that we could win the race. I remember sitting a few of my teammates before the race and we were just laughing our heads off. We were just having a really honestly good time. And I think that is part of the reason why we did so well, is we weren't nervous because we were afraid we were going to lose something. We were nervous because we were just so excited to do it. I think those Hollywood movies have something that are true, which is that you can wake up on that day and it can be that belief that really gets you through it.
Itching to get them. Now's the time.
So many people watching back in Canada as Avalon gives the medal to Kirsten Kitz. And now we hear the Canadian national anthem.
The greatest film director in Hollywood couldn't possibly shoot a picture so genuine about you biting down on that gold medal. To me, it was everything coming together. What does it feel like to get a gold medal put over and that ribbon placed over your neck?
I think the true moment that really showed how we all felt was when we crossed the finish line. I kind of insinuated earlier that, yeah, we thought we could win the race, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that I would be winning a gold medal. So I was absolutely determined to do whatever it took to win the race. But when we crossed the finish line, that's when I was just hit with like complete shock. I was sobbing, I was laughing, I was just so unbelievably overwhelmed with emotions, because that's when it hit us that not only had we won the race we were setting out to win, but we had become Olympic champions. It was probably the most electric feeling I've ever experienced in my life. Biting down that medal, I was just thinking about all those people that had supported me. I was thinking about my mom and how she had been such a formidable and incredible athlete, but had maybe experienced a lot of setbacks and hadn't been given as much opportunity to perform during her time. And so I was thinking about how this wasn't just success for me and my teammates, it was success for all the people that had really supported us and believed in us all the way.
When we return, Avalon and I discuss her excitement for the upcoming Paris Olympics and her message for future athletes. Plus, I'll be joined by Sam Effah, and what he has to say about winning, well, those two are words that matter.
Will Mitchell hold on? She does! It's a goal for Kelsey Mitchell of Canada!
RBC Training Ground identifies raw talent and then works to help athletes reach the top. At an RBC Training Ground event, Cycling Canada took notice of the power of Kelly Mitchell's legs. Placed on a watt bike in 6 seconds of furious pedaling, she exceeded the national standard, and she hadn't owned a bike since she was 12. Today, Kelsey Mitchell is a gold medalist.
What is it with women sprinters in Canada? Wow!
Her success and yours matter to RBC.
New Zealanders, it's Canada who are going to win their first gold in the women's 8 since 1992, ahead of the Kiwis.
She's out of her seat, the Canadian Cox, Kirsten Kitt. Hug Avalon Wasteneys, a 23-year-old.
I just don't think it's fully hit us, and we're just kind of rolling with the punches still and processing it. But every time I watch that video, I just get the chills, kind of feel like crying a little bit, because it's just really special.
You're listening to Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
My guest today is Canadian Olympic Gold Medalist and RBC Training Ground alumni, Avalon Wasteneys. So let's talk about Paris 2024. You've got the gold medal. You're no longer the underdog. How do you motivate yourself? What changes in your mindset? Because now when you walk through that village, they see you as a gold medalist.
We've had other opportunities to be the top dog over these past few years. And unfortunately, we haven't been. You know, we've performed, but not up to that gold medal standard. And so I think we're actually going into this Olympic Games once again the underdog, and which is kind of ironic. But it's also, I think, how myself and how a lot of my teammates do like to compete. It is a lot of fun to be the underdog. It's fun to have people count you out and then be like, nope, I'm going to prove you wrong. So I think we're kind of actually going in a similar position. We had a few years of not super consistent training. I was dealing with a lot of health issues over these past few years that, yeah, like I said, really impacted our consistency in training. I think now going into this Olympics, though, we're looking really strong. We got a new coach who is just absolutely remarkable and does a really, really good job of bringing this team together and identifying our strengths while making sure that we are addressing what our weaknesses are as well. So I think we're going in as underdogs, but I'm feeling really confident in our crew.
How is your health? Because you talked about you're dealing with health issues in the past. Are you feeling you're at a place where you can deliver your best, or are you still, is it your curse in life to become the best regardless of the health issues that you face?
Yeah, I've been dealing with a lot of on and off chronic sicknesses over these past few years since Tokyo. I actually had a relapse of mono right before, like literally the day before we got on the plane for the 2022 World Championships. So I competed through that World Championships while managing the symptoms of mono. So I've had huge hits on the consistency in my training. I've been taking in and out of training a lot. And I got to say that really, really does something to your confidence. Thankfully, I do just have this weird sense of self-belief that kind of acts as a foundation and really helps me weather those storms when my confidence is being brought down. I think that was kind of instilled in me, as I mentioned earlier, through my coach, Dave. I also was recently reflecting on that and thought, now that I think about it, I used to read, and I still read, a lot of fantasy novels, and that's always where the hero, they face all these challenges along the way, right? But at the end of the day, they always persevere and they always find success. And so I think that's maybe given me a little bit of naive self-belief over the years, but I'm going to hold on to it because I think there's something to be said for being resilient.
I want to ask you a question. Do you think Canadians take their Olympians for granted? And my reference is a 2023 article in Rowing Canada, very gracious and thanking the country, RBC Training Ground, all the people who supported you. But I also sensed it's almost like it was a call out to Canada to say that the people that devote so much time and energy to represent the country, it would be very welcome if the country represented them better.
You know, I don't think Canadians take Olympians for granted necessarily, but I don't think that all Canadians realize how unglamorous sport can be. I think you get this idea of professional athletes who have these massive sponsorship deals, who are earning a ton of money doing their sport. They have like private chefs feeding them. But in reality, most Canadian athletes, like, we're living technically below the poverty line in terms of the kind of funding that we get. Only within the last, I think, couple of days, Sport Canada announced that they're going to be raising the monthly carding that we get to match inflation rate. So Canadian athletes have been struggling financially for a long time. Sport is incredible, and it can unite people. It can inspire people. It's just some of the most wonderful things that ever happened to me, but it also takes a lot out of a person and means that it's very difficult, or it can be very difficult for them to plan for a future, just because of the fact that they're not being paid enough to do this sport that they do full time every single day. So I think just having a little bit more of that awareness, maybe you know an athlete and you can help them out by giving them some meals if you have time, or maybe you have an athlete renting from you and you can give them a break on rent. But I think just having a little bit more awareness that most of us are not living very glamorously.
You've taken on this role of ambassadorship for RBC Training Ground, and I've been watching the short clips you do on Instagram and such. What's the message that you hope you can leave the young Avalons out there to keep going, regardless of setbacks, regardless of the cards you're dealt, regardless of the circumstances, that the journey's not always easy, but it's worth it?
First thing that I found really helpful is figuring out is, what is your why? Why are you in sport? What are you getting out of it? What drives you? So figure out your why. And then the second thing is something I've really struggled with, and I still struggle with, is this desire for perfectionism. But I think it's important to wrap your mind around the fact that a little is better than nothing. To put this into context, there were times where I would try to make this perfect workout plan, this perfect plan for how I was going to achieve my dreams, but I'd become so paralyzed with trying to figure out how I was going to navigate that I would end up doing nothing, which does not help you. So I'd say that just focus on doing a little more than doing something perfect. 10 minutes of work is better than no minutes of work. So focus on just doing tiny little steps at a time, rather than trying to create this perfect scenario or this perfect plan. Another thing that I think is important to know is that, motivation, that really comes and goes. There are going to be times when you feel super unmotivated. And confidence comes and goes. There's going to be times when you're feeling like, man, I'm just super bad at this today. So I'd say instead focus on building discipline and routine, so you don't have to focus on motivation to do the daily things. And then focus on building just this sense of internal self-belief that can act as that foundation for your confidence.
Avalon, what is your why?
My why is that I really want to know what's out there and what's possible for me. I don't necessarily care about being the best in the world. I want to be the best possible version of myself. And so I take this adversity and all these opportunities of challenge as opportunities for growth. And they just add to my main character fantasy fictional story.
You know, Avalon, I always end my show with my 3 takeaways. And I had them nailed until your last wonderful, and they're no longer Dave-isms, they're now Avalon-isms that are going to call. But I mean, the first one is just really the lessons that Dave brought you, which is the concept of finish the race. And I think that's a universal lesson. And I think a lot of times nowadays it's easy to not finish the race, often because your world's inside the cloud or on a keyboard, or there's no physicality involved with it. So it's sometimes easy to check out. And I think if we all applied that mentality of finish what you start, I think we'd all end the day with a greater sense of passion and purpose. The second one is just the hero's journey. What you talk about is a fantasy novel, but it's the person that goes on a quest and has to overcome obstacles, and they meet their Yodas and mentors along the way, and they succeed with their dream, but come back a very different and changed person. You're living that hero's journey, and your mom's being your Yoda, you know, your coach is being your Yoda. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that after you finish with your competitive athletic ability, that you become one of the more inspirational speakers in Canada, because you have context and you've got a real sense of authenticity, and you've had mono, and you've had your mental well-being has not always been firing on all cylinders. And there's days that you haven't been motivated, and all those lessons in life are lessons that are so important and so many other people need to hear. So I can understand why the RBC Training Ground has you as an ambassador. And then the third thing that I'm so impressed with is how you've used what a lot of people consider reasons not to do things, your ADHD and your anxiety, and have managed to turn that into your superpowers at times when you really needed to come to terms with how you're feeling, and in doing so, finding out your why. All of this that's been given you, the legacy from your parents and your family, the mental well-being, the changing of sports, the leaving the little school to go to the big high school, all of this stuff to me has really laddered into your why, which is that fantasy novel of the hero capable of conquering anything that's in front of them. So as a dad, I'm just so proud of you. And I'm sorry I can say it because I'm not your dad, but I'm just so proud of how mature and confident and honest and wonderful you are as a human being. I really appreciate you being on Chatter That Matters.
Well, that was just about the most wonderful thing anyone said about me. I'm blushing over here, practically tearing up, because that was just so thoughtful. So thank you very much for saying that.
If you're a fan of this show, you know that I'm a fan of Sam Effah. He's represented Canada at 3 World Championships, 3 World University Games, 2 Commonwealth Games. He also came in second on Amazing Race Canada Season 7. And he loves to give back. He loves to help people get to where they want to go. And we're going to talk to him today about his full-time role with RBC Training Ground. Sam, welcome back to Chatter That Matters.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. Excited to be back.
I have to believe you're pretty busy with the Olympics around the corner.
Yeah, definitely. We're gearing up. We have RBC Olympians, RBC Training Ground athletes, all gearing up for Paris. So it's a really exciting time for us.
Tell me a little bit more about RBC Training Ground. What is it, and why is it important, not only to the athletes, but to Canada in general?
So RBC Training Ground, it's a talent ID and athlete funding program. We find and fund the next generation of Canadian Olympians. So if you're like anywhere from 14 to 25 living in Canada, we have these qualifying events where essentially we have national sport organizations. So like Canoe Kayak Canada, all the way to Bobsleigh Canada, that are just like watching to see if you have Olympic potential. And it's really cool because, you know, this is not something I had when I was younger, but I would have loved to just come to an event where, you know, I test my speed, strength, endurance, and power. And then somebody tells me, hey, you're geared for track cycling. But the really cool thing about this program is we've seen athletes, you know, they just came out just to have some fun, meet some people, but they're on the path now to, you know, the Olympic podium. And I think that in its own is an amazing story. So we're there from kind of the beginnings all the way up to when they step on that podium and get that medal around their neck.
Avalon is so complimentary on how important Training Ground is to her ambitions to be a repeat gold medalist. She talks about how important it is to the community in general to know that an organization like RBC is not just getting involved with the Olympics to get some attention, but in fact getting involved in the Olympics to help more Canadians pursue their dreams. How successful is it? Is she an anomaly, or are we seeing more and more athletes come through it with that sort of appetite for owning the podium?
Yeah, I wouldn't say Avalon is an anomaly. I think she's absolutely talented, but I think we have many Avalons across the country. We just need to go out and find them. Like so far in the program, we've tested over 14,000 athletes. 1,600 have been identified by national sport organizations as having potential. So to see just the work that we've already done, but then also have athletes like Avalon, Pierce Lepage, Kelsey Mitchell, we've had 13 Olympians, go from our program to the game, 7 medalists. I don't think it's an anomaly. And I think as we move forward in our program, we're in year 9 right now. We only can really go up from here. And I'm very, very pumped to see how many other Olympians we have up in Paris.
Sam, in the previous episode, you talked about finding purpose and how much you loved to give back. I have to believe this job is the job of a lifetime for you, because it's within a world that you know well. So you have currency and credibility, but you also have the resources, the RBC Training Ground, to give young Sams a chance. Yeah,
I wish I had started in a program like this when I was younger, just to be able to try a ton of different sports, see where I sort of fit in. But I'm passionate about it because it kind of intersects that community development piece. This year we went into some communities that generally don't get a lot of events like this. Like we went up to Grand Prairie for a training ground event, and we recruited. We're going to Thompson, Manitoba, so a smaller community. And I'm just, a big thing for me is giving as many people an opportunity as we can.
And Sam, if you'd gone through training ground at a younger age, do you think you would have found another sport, or do you think that you were just set up to be one of the fastest in the world?
I think, honestly, if I went through training ground, RBC Training Ground, I can see bobsleigh or skeleton Canada coming at me just because I had a fast start. But I feel like I'll never really know. Maybe I could have been a speed skater. Maybe I could have been on skis. But maybe I could have just stuck in the same sport. I feel like I'll never really know, but there could have been the opportunity for sure.
Well, that's the beauty about RBC Training Ground, because now they know. So I really appreciate you joining me on Chatter That Matters, and I hope you come back more than the 2 times you've been on so far, because you're just a fantastic guest.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate it.
Chatter That Matters has been a presentation of RBC.
It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening. Let's chat soon.